Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. I'm now beginning the second lecture of this series. This lecture too is going to be divided into two different clips. The message that we Muslims have with us in the form of God's message has certain salient features. I'll mention a few of them in this presentation. The first of the features is what has been described in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th chapter, verse 3, wherein the Almighty is mentioning, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum. Today I have completed for you your religion. So one feature of this message is that the message has been completed. God's religion is complete. What it means is that the Almighty wanted to give humanity a message in the form of His religion, His deen, and when this particular verse was revealed, which was, one can understand, one of the last verses, if not the very last verse, God completed whatever He wanted to give to humanity in the form of religion. Religion has its own domain. It talks about morality, and as we have seen before, it talks about certain laws which are relevant to morality. It talks about beliefs. Within morality, there is this mention of ibadat, acts of worship in Sharia, and that's about it. God wanted humanity to know some important principles and important expectations, important laws in the form of God's religion. What He wanted to share with humanity has now been completed. Does it mean that God's religion mentions everything? That it's a complete core of life as some Muslims describe it? The fact of the matter is that that's not the case. God's religion never claims that it describes everything, that it is a complete core of life, that no matter what questions come to your mind, God's message has claimed that it has answers to them. Why should God's message answer everything? God has given humans intellect, the ability to understand, the ability to argue, to learn from experiences, etc. So humans have been provided with adequate understanding, critical approach, critical way of thinking to learn and improve. And that's what they are encouraged to do. However, there was a domain where humans wanted divine guidance, God's guidance. That was the domain of morality and certain tricky questions within morality, the domain that has to do with the unseen world, and, as I said, within the description of Sharia, acts of worship. That's what God revealed most clearly, and in His message He has declared that it has been now completed. In other words, if God had in His plan 50 items to inform humans, for example, when the 50th item was also introduced, was also given, the Almighty said, I have completed my religion for you. It does not claim that it is mentioning everything, that how you make your buildings, your roads, how you cure your ill people, and how you take decisions in administration, etc. They have all been dealt with in God's message completely? Not at all. That's not what the claim is. So, the first feature is that God's religion is now complete, which really means that we do not need to look for religion anywhere else. It's there and it has been mentioned clearly. The other thing that it mentions in the same verse is وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي, and I have perfected for you my mercy. That is, God, through giving His religion and completing it, has perfected His mercy for human beings. Life is a big blessing. It's a mercy of the Almighty. We didn't deserve it. Our intellect is a great mercy. Our relationships with parents, relatives, friends, etc. are a great blessing. The resources that we have in this life, the manner our needs are getting met, they're all great blessings of the Almighty. However, man still was in need of looking for guidance. There was something missing. What is the purpose of this life? Who created us? Why did He create us? What are His attributes? What are we expected to do in this life? Why are there so many differences? Why do people die? What would happen after death? Etc. So, despite this life being a great blessing, there was an area where it was lacking. By giving His deen, His religion, message, God has perfected His mercy on us. That's what it says. It's icing on the cake. The third important feature of God's message is that this message addresses the entire mankind. It says in verse 158 of Surah 7, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ, O prophets, say, O mankind, O people, إِنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ جَمِيعًا, I am God's messenger for you, all of you. In other words, this message has come for the entire mankind, even though it was revealed in a particular point in time in the Arabian Peninsula more than 1400 years ago. And it most certainly had some direct, immediate addressees. The message, its address is for the entire humankind. All humans living on this planet are the addressees of this message. That's what the potential of it is. That's what people who believe in it should realize and feel responsible for delivering it to others. In the case of many earlier prophets, more particularly who came before Ibrahim alayhi salam, they would address their respective nations. So, in the same surah, Surah 7, chapter 7, Surah Al-A'raf, we have a number of verses. For example, verse 59, chapter 7, verse 59 mentions Nuh alayhi salam. He addressed his nation and said, Ya qawmi abudullah, O my nation, worship God. Verse 65 mentions the same thing about Hud alayhi salam, 73, Saleh alayhi salam, 80, Lut alayhi salam, and 85, Shuaib alayhi salam. All these respective messengers of God, may God's mercy be on all of them, are addressing their respective nations. Why? Well, simply because of the fact that the times when they came to this world, means of transportation and communication were so primitive that it wasn't possible for the same one message to get across to the entire humanity. So, these messengers, they addressed their respective nations. A nation living a few hundred miles away, they weren't even aware of it. So, they addressed their nations. When the time reached when it was possible for a message to be delivered to the entire mankind, the Almighty decided that the message is now meant for the entire humanity. The next important feature of the message that we have from God is that it has been declared that it's the very last message of God. There is going to be no further message coming to mankind from God. It is mentioned in verse 40 of Surah 33. Surah 33 is Surah Al-Ahzab. Its 40th verse says, Ma kana Muhammadun aba ahadim mir rijalikum. Muhammad, God's mercy be on him, is not father of any men from amongst you. Walakir Rasulullah. However, he is God's messenger. Wa khataman nabiyyin. And he is the seal of prophets. The seal which when it is embossed, it just completes the entire project. It's the same seal that has been talked about in the Quran when the Almighty mentions Khatamallahu ala qulubihim. God sealed their hearts. That is, no guidance can now enter their hearts. And likewise, there are other examples as well, that when the word khatam, khatama, khitam, etc. are used, they actually mean that something is getting completely packed and sealed so that nothing can move out of it, nothing can enter it. So, the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, is the last of the prophets. We do learn from the Quran, and we shall talk about it later in more details, that the Quran does very clearly mention that when Prophet Muhammad, may God's mercy be on him, came to this world and delivered his message, he actually mentioned that my arrival was clearly mentioned in the earlier books. And their scholars, people who know the earlier books, they know that I am God's messenger. They were waiting for me. They recognize me quite as clearly as they recognize their own sons. On the other hand, we read the Quran from cover to cover, A to Z, and we find that there is no mention whatsoever that a new prophet would come and he would be of such and such features. On the contrary, we have this famous verse which says that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, he is the very last prophet. When this decision was taken, there was another decision that was taken. You see, sometimes an important decision is taken, but that decision is not possible to be implemented unless there is another accompanying decision. Otherwise, the basic decision, the original decision, will not be able to be properly implemented. So, when it was decided that the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, is the last of the prophets, it was also simultaneously decided that the message that he will bring, the message that he has brought, is going to be fully and completely preserved. It will not be allowed to be altered. This was not declared in the case of the earlier messages and books, not because they were not important, not because the Almighty, God forbid, had some stepmotherly relationship with them, not at all. All messages of messengers and prophets were from God. All are worthy of our respect, equally worthy of respect. But the fact of the matter is that in God's scheme of things, when the earlier prophets mentioned their messages and gave their books, because in the scheme of the Almighty, those messages, those books were to be followed by more prophets. Therefore, there was no urgent need for the messages to be preserved, fully preserved. Well, this life is a life of trial, and the Almighty does not want to bind people necessarily for not being able to do certain things. Life being a trial, if there were some people who were evil, who wanted to tamper with the Almighty's message, well, there was a possibility, but then there were checks and balances also in the form of new prophets coming and correcting the wrongs done by the people who wanted to alter and change those messages. However, when a decision was taken that no new message is going to come, then it was important and essential that this last message be fully preserved. And that's exactly what the Almighty did. He is mentioned in the Quran in verse 9 of Surah Al-Hijr, Surah number 15. It says, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Indeed, we have revealed this reminder, az-zikr, and we are going to ensure its preservation. God made a firm commitment that He is going to make sure that this last message is fully preserved, is not allowed to be tampered with. The earlier messages were also from God, but because there were new prophets coming later, therefore there was no urgency for those messages to be completely preserved. However, in this particular case, because no further prophets were to come, therefore the Almighty decided that the message that the last messenger, the last prophet has brought is to be fully preserved. That's one of the additional arguments to clarify that indeed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the last of the prophets. There is no further need of any prophet, and the Almighty has therefore made sure that this last message is not only complete but is fully preserved. This message in this particular verse, Surah number 15 verse 9, has been described as az-zikr. It's a reminder. And I've already mentioned the reason why this expression has been used. The reason is that this message of God, as indeed all other earlier messages, are based on human nature. The morality that we already are aware of, we were born with. God's message doesn't tell us anything new. It just reminds us about what we already know. It gives us clear instructions on matters where we tend to disagree and get confused, and clarifies those aspects of God's scheme which are as yet hidden and unseen. So the message of God is a reminder of what we already know, and God is mentioning clearly that He has made a firm resolve that this message is going to be fully preserved now that there are no further prophets that are going to come. So what I've mentioned in this presentation is that this message that we have with us, the message of God, is a complete message from God. Whatever religion God wanted to give has now been completed. God, through completing His message, has perfected His mercy. This message is meant for the entire mankind. All humans are the addressees of this message, some directly and some indirectly. This message is the last message of God. No further message from God is going to come anymore. And finally, this message has been therefore fully preserved. It will not be allowed to be tampered with. I will deliver a few other aspects of this understanding that we have talked about in this session in the next clip. I hope you join me then.